Welcome to Hashknife Hangouts. I'm Calen Carpenter. With me is my partner, co-host, and father, Brandon. Before we get started, for those of you on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. Facebook, like, comment, share. Find us on Instagram at hashknife.ranch.mt, all lowercase. And now to the opening notes. I'm going to actually just wing the free notes here because I didn't prepare any this week. But what I'm going to talk about is the Pause Act. What's the Pause Act? The Pause Act was brought to me by my father. And I don't know how he got that, but when I turn it over to him, he'll kind of explain some of that. But pause is just like the pause button, PAUSE. And I got it highlighted here. It stands for Protect Animals from Unnecessary Suffering and Exploitation, or PAUSE. So just like everything else in the government, it's an acronym. I've got about 4 tabs open here. So I'll start with some of the sponsors. It's actually, I think it's in it looks like it's in the House at Washington, D.C. right now. It was brought up by Representative Yvette Harrell out of New Mexico, and then co-sponsored by 2 Colorado congressmen, Lauren Boebert, if I say that name right, and then Ken Buck. Well, what's some of the issues that agriculture has with it? Looking through some various I guess articles and stuff online. Obviously don't believe everything you have online, but when they all kind of say the same thing, there's probably a something that says that it's not necessarily good. It says it's Initiative 16 starting out of Colorado, I think is why it started. It says it criminalizes farmers, ranchers, and vets who use currently accepted animal husbandry practices, and we'll get to that in a second. Changes the state statutory language to define common animal care practices as cruelty to animals. It bans the slaughter for animals that have lived less than 25% of their natural lifespan. And then criminalizes the following veterinary and animal husbandry practices: spaying and neutering, birthing assistance, reproductive practices, and in parentheses, artificial insemination, or AI, pregnancy diagnosis, fertility testing, and anything along that line. It further eliminates accepted animal husbandry practices, opening the door to animal cruelty prosecution for common and basic practices such as feeding, sheltering, and transportation. So what are some of the implications of Initiative 16, according to one of these articles? It destroys, this is specifically looking at Colorado, because I think this is where it originated from. It destroys Colorado's $5 billion livestock industry. These are some of the implications that could happen based off this. Somebody, I'm sure.
Well, these are measurable. What would happen?
Yeah, they're doing some
projections.
Yeah, some penciling and seeing what it could do. It says it would crush Colorado's 1 billion with a B beef export market. So 5 billion with a B livestock, 1 billion beef. Kill jobs by shutting down most, if not all, of Colorado beef and lamb processing. Significantly increase consumer costs for meat, which you're already seeing that. Result in practices that are bad for the animals and the environment by requiring detrimental production practices. I'd be curious to see what exactly they're talking about there. And then erase agriculture's heritage in Colorado by effectively banning rodeos, county fairs, and horse shows. I'm not sure how that would happen. But here's one of the biggest ones. And what they're talking about, this is why this is kind of a good one to start an example with. What did it say? What was one of the first ones for the initiative? It could criminalize farmers, ranchers, and vets who are using currently accepted animal husbandry practices for care of animals. What does that mean? The Pause Act, and this is actually a quote from an article titled Pause Act, a Radical Threat to Ranching, out of Drovers. Drovers is like a beef, essentially like a beef magazine. So here's a quote. Pause Act would redefine animal cruelty and expand the definition of a sex act with an animal. In short, the Pause Act would outlaw many common practices such as artificial insemination, embryo transfer, pregnancy checking, or bull soundness exams, because essentially you would be placing your hand or some sort of device inside the animal, and therefore that's how it's defined as a sex act. So with that, I will turn it over to Dad.
Well, there's a whole bunch of things going on here. I mean, you have groups like PETA. Uh, they've been railing and bringing up just just wacko type ideas for years and years, 30, 40 years anyway, that I was aware of them. And so they're redefining, like everybody politically is redefining something. So acceptable uh, practices is what you make that sound like. If it's an acceptable practice that's ethical and it does no harm, or increases the health of the animal, or to help them diagnose to increase the health of an animal, that's an acceptable practice. But what somebody can also say is, and some of these nutcases say, is that, oh yeah, they put these cows, they squeeze them down into a device, and they lock their head down, and then they invade their genitals with a giant probe, and it's like, okay, they may be artificially inseminating, or they may be using a wand to check pregnancy using ultrasound. I mean, they skew whatever you're doing to make it sound like it's a horrific torture. And this has been the narrative of these nut jobs forever. They've been trying to shut rodeo down, the sport of rodeo, for decades.
Yeah,
And
there's a common hashtag in Twitter called buck rodeo. Like buck it away, get rid of it.
right,
It's a whole movement, just like what you're saying, of trying to criminalize it. And this is where also why I personally don't like calf roping, because I see how hard it is on the animal. They use that as one of the primary events for it, because when the calf hits the end of the line, it flips around. And it's hard on its neck, and so they use stuff like that to try and justify the whole sport is cruelty to animals. And then they say stuff like flank straps or wrapping it around the animal's testicles, and that's just not true.
it's not true. Exactly. So I mean, they blatantly lie about some of the practices or what's actually going on. So I've never ever met a vet, or even heard of a vet, that would do something that is unethical in
Right.
order to, when they're dealing with an animal. Never, absolutely never. I mean, their code of ethics is very, very strong, and
Do
you
vets take a
can't get that
Hippocratic
out of it.
oath as well?
I think it's similar, yeah. If not the same. I mean, I think the Hippocratic Oath is generalized, where it's you know not species specific. So I don't know, honestly, if I'm sure they do, but whether it's the exact same one, I don't know if it's worded simply or differently or whatever. I'm not aware, but look, what's really going on is you've got a group of people, and they have used advertising campaigns. They have used, um, ploys and gimmicks. Somebody dressed up in a fish suit for anti-fishing. That's a PETA member. They had him right down here in Billings, Montana. I remember when that stupid guy in a fish suit come through there and talking about how it's cruelty. It was the really prevalent thing in fishing. It's you're ripping their jaws out and they're killing them, and I mean, it's like, okay, that can happen. However, you don't want to shut everything down, because you know what, fish are good to eat, love them. um, so they use these campaigns that are really effective to a very small group of people. And when I was working for the state as a warden, we figured that uh, 10% of the population was anti-hunting. 10% of the population was, actual hunters. So that leaves 80% of the population that was didn't care or ambivalent towards it. And so
Right.
they're looking for a demographic that were single women between like 18 and 40 or 45, who have nothing, no tie, no children, no husband, and so have some expendable money, and that's what they're targeting to fund their operations. So it's and they're not they're not about saving an animal. They're not about doing great things for some animals that are in some kind of a like a puppy mill or anything like that. They're about shutting down anything that has to do with any kind of
Mm-hmm.
meat processing, consumption of meat. A lot of them are some of these vegan groups. You know, and I don't care if you don't want to eat beef, don't eat beef. Don't tell me that I can't eat it. Don't tell
Mm-hmm.
me I can't produce it for people who want to eat it. Um, you know, just
Well, and
because you don't like it for whatever reason.
I would also argue one of the, I don't want to say enemies because I know plenty of people who are vegan or vegetarian, and they're not an enemy of meat production. They're just, they're not for it, you know. But
Well,
I've noticed,
there's either religious reasons that you don't eat meat,
yeah,
or some people that do that. That, you know, we know some people that are it's against their overall religion to consume, you know, flesh. Okay. But you know what? They don't tell us we can't do it, and they understand. They go, oh yeah, well, you know, it's just the way we were raised, and
yeah.
we're not interested in it, and it's like that's okay,
But
you know.
one of,
But
like
they're not
what
trying
I'm
to.
trying to get to is like, again, not enemy, but the belief or the movement that's, the, I guess, kind of threatening, the most threatening, is those are the best words I can think of, would be probably veganism, because vegetarians will still use beef products, they'll still use
Mm,
those byproducts, they just won't eat the meat,
yeah.
whereas vegan is completely against the use of all products associated with the animal. And that's what I think gets the most frustrating, because then they're like, well, it's a lifestyle, but my lifestyle also tells me that I can't use any of these byproducts, when I mean, it's, that is the first, one of the first systems of really truly utilizing the most resources from what you have. It's really almost like recycling in a sense.
Mm. Well, and their message is changing because they were just trying to encourage people, and or they were actually shaming people too. I mean, you had people, you know, throwing buckets of paint, red paint, on people who
Yeah.
had what they thought was a fur, or were wearing leather, or, you know, whatever that they didn't like. And that message generally, I think, has failed over the last few decades. It just really didn't go anywhere other than make people mad.
I was gonna say, when
And
you're assaulting someone, it's hard to get that message.
right, right. So what they've done then instead of is they have done really a couple of things. I think they've politicized their movement, and by doing that, they have people who were like in Colorado. One of them is a partner to the governor, and and so then was appointed to a position, a political position, and so now they have some political clout. They got some people that they can, you know, extort, if you want to call it that. I mean, that's a
Mm-hmm.
strong word, but you know what? When you strong arm somebody because of your political position, it's hard to call it something different.
Right.
Um, so, and then so what they're doing is using a tool of politics and a law, and distort whatever they're doing, and saying that, you know, we violate these animals, or we're sexual predators to the animals that we have and we're raising, so therefore we need to be criminalized for that, and do that through laws. So their message doesn't work, so now they're going to force you by putting out a false narrative to make people go, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. Those who don't get it, don't understand, don't know, don't want to really inform themselves because it takes too much time. And so they get them on board with numbers or votes and say, this is how we're going to do this. We're going to make this happen. We're going to force you to do it through a law. That's one portion of it. Now, the other part of that is it's really fashionable to jump on the climate bandwagon and say, oh my God, these cows are all killing us. We're all going to
Mm-hmm.
die because a cow, and we've talked about this before. So they're combining those forces for a common goal that is not necessarily uh, honest or non-detrimental. What's that going to do to them? Um, you know, is in a larger sense, economically in their state. Politically, they don't care. The politics is just a tool for them. It's just a sword. That's really the way I view that what they do. So how do you stay in power? You cut people's heads off. That's easy. That's been done since the first guy picked up a stick and hit another guy and killed him.
I have a feeling, um, based off the current governor of Colorado, because he made a glowing review, and this was in one of the articles. If the article is accurate, he apparently had a very supporting view and review of the Burger King commercial from last year that was anti cattle and saying they're feeding them lemongrass and stuff like that.
Right.
Apparently he was very supportive of that, and so therefore he's also supportive of these initiatives in the Pause Act to try and criminalize some of this stuff so that he can, break down the agricultural industry. But I think, and here's where I'm kind of headed with that. I think it's easy for him to probably legitimize because his state is pro marijuana. And so if your new agriculture focus is going to be the production and distribution of marijuana, it's easy to get rid of one section of agriculture and build up the other, if that makes sense. Because then he's like, it's a net loss of zero. I'm just swapping one agricultural industry out for another.
So when you smoke marijuana, that means you don't have to eat meat because it'll replace that.
Hey, I'm just saying.
No, I know, but the logic is not there.
From the pencil pushing and the keyboard clicking perspective, hey, we're not going to lose any money because we're going to make it up for it on this other end of the spectrum. And it won't involve the use of any animals. We can just use all of the land for hemp and marijuana production.
Right.
Okay, sounds good. Let's get on board. Maybe that's the justification. Maybe it's not. I don't know. I'd love to talk to the governor and be like, hey, sir, why do you see it that way? Why are you doing it this way? What's your backup plan for when you lose the $5 billion worth of agriculture based off of the projections on these articles?
Well, what are you going to do when, and really all it is, what this whole thing breaks down to is not necessarily that people are being cruel to animals, because we've talked about this before. There's, what sense does it make for us to harm our livestock? We're trying to do the best we can for them. What this really amounts to is another tool to shut down agriculture. And if you can't get the message out there to not eat meat, so what we're going to do is we're going to force people out of business. If you can't have a vet come out, or you give an animal a shot, a vaccination, you can't do it with this either. That's cruel, right? You can't keep a herd healthy.
With that justification, then you shouldn't be giving out COVID vaccines. So,
Oh, don't hit that one. No.
Well, I'm just saying,
Right. No,
that's my point. If you're going
to
do that to people, then why can't you do it to animals?
Radicalism and hypocrisy go hand in hand.
Yeah. Here's another thing too. I agree with you, but playing the other side of the coin for anybody that's watching and they're not agreeing at all with what we're saying. Why force out agriculture? Where if we're going to say the United States is no longer going to create any sort of agricultural products, no beef, no poultry, no lamb, anything like that, no grains, because we can use the land for something else. Where are we going to get our agricultural products, and why would we push it completely out of the United States?
Well, see, their argument, I think, is you don't need to have protein through a live animal. You can get your protein through plants, and you're healthier. Which I say no. There are many supplements, call it that you get through eating red meat.
So you
cannot get anywhere else.
So you think agriculture is trying to systematically get pushed from beef, or what I should say, meat production and grain production, to solely grain production, and then some of those grains or vegetables will be utilized to create protein-based products.
Yes,
essentially. Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing
too is, like, your pulse crops are touted as as plant-based proteins.
Mm-hmm.
You know, your beans and peas, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so look
And
at how
just as
many
a
things
point
are
for
advertised
that,
as plant-based.
I think that's interesting to me too, because going back to the hypocrisy that we were discussing, we found out over the last 20 years, because of the rapid obesity increase in the United States, sugar and processed foods are the majority of the reason why people are overweight. I find it funny that we're trying to end up taking grains and processing them to make a protein product. When you could just get it by creating a good production through an animal, by feeding it right, taking care of it, supplementing it with grain and mineral, like in a natural manner, rather than, poking and prodding with needles and supplementing it through that way. I'm saying using it actual stuff like what we do. What we do is legitimately considered grass fed, and then they're grain fed probably at their later part of their life in the feedlots. But
right.
the utilizing that is a so much healthier way, because then you get it straight from the animal versus, okay, now we're going to process everything. And like the stuff that goes through processing, and to even mention some of the, like, you're not always going to be hitting home runs. There's going to be issues where, I don't know, oil gets in your food because the machine's creating it, like stuff like that, where it's not going to be healthy for
just,
you.
Just the preservation process alone. Look, I love jerky.
Yeah.
Love jerky. If you've ever made jerky, what does it take to preserve that so it has a shelf life? And I don't mean a shelf life through a store, even a shelf life at home.
Mm-hmm.
There's a high amount of sodium, as a very large, that's the whole point. It used to be, they used to send people away with salt pork, and that was nothing more than chunks of pork. I mean, literally caked in and have salt around it. So it dehydrated it, preserved it. Salt's a natural preservative. So yeah, I love jerky, but you know what you put in it to make it as jerky to be able to stay, consumable for a while, that's hard on the old bod. That stuff
Mm-hmm.
is tough. So your point being, now make that a shelf life that's going to sit on, a 3, 4, 5 months before it gets consumed. What is that? And those are, I think we've got some serious health concerns over that too.
Well, I mean, one of your prime examples is the military population. You've got, for the most part, young, healthy men and women throughout the country, and then you give them MREs. The things that they do in the short run, what MREs do to your body, you'd be astounded. And then I know plenty of people that have legit esophagus issues because of the amount of ulcers that they've created. And now some of it might be stress, but it's also, I'm guaranteeing you, it's the food, because I've known guys that have lived off MRE straight for 9 months.
Yeah.
And then the gastrointestinal issues that they have for the rest of their life as well. And the preservatives that go inside those things, there's a lot there.
Yep, exactly. So, but that's not, they're not just sticking meat in those either. They're sticking other things in that.
Yeah.
That are doing it. So it's a broad spectrum type of preservative, whether it's meat, plant, doesn't matter. And so it doesn't matter you take meat away if you're going to look at that as a health issue, as like you're saying, taking that side of the argument. That doesn't matter, because it's what you're adding to that food that is doing most of the detrimental things to your body. Fresh meat is good stuff.
Yeah,
Fresh
I agree.
Vegetables are good stuff.
Mm-hmm. I think moving on to another topic, let me pull this up real quick. We talked about the animal has to be slaughtered no earlier than 25% of their natural life.
Yeah.
I was looking through one of the articles while you were talking early on. Oh, here we go. Specifically out of the Montrose Daily Press. I'm not sure where that's from. Okay.
Montrose,
it says,
probably.
Under the pause rules, one could not send an animal to slaughter until it had lived 25% of its expected lifetime. And from this article, it says, here's the new insertion into the law. And in quotation marks, this is what I'll read. Natural lifespan for the following species shall be explicitly defined here based on the statistical estimates. A cow lives to 20 years, so 25%, 5 years. A chicken lives to 8 years. 25% is 2 years. A turkey lives 10 years, 2.5. A duck lives to 6 years, 1.5. A pig lives to 15. So you're going to be looking closer to 3.5, 4 years for them. And sheep lives to 15 years. Again, 3.5, 4 years. And a rabbit lives to 6 years. So
I have never seen a 20-year-old cow.
that's what I was thinking.
Nope.
I don't know anything about chicken, turkey, ducks. I know absolutely nothing about pigs, sheep, rabbit. I know only thing about cows. An old cow, 14.
Oh, that's and because we normally, because of the way we take care of our cows,
Yeah.
we have them breeding and we can get 12, sometimes 13 years out of them, but they are at the end of their life.
And that's that again, a really old cow for us. That's 10 years of breeding essentially. We've gotten 10 calves from them. 14 is, I mean, they're 99 years old.
I don't think we've had a 14-year-old cow.
Where are they getting these statistics?
Well, here's the thing.
They're 20 years old.
Those are estimates. And if you flood the internet with false narrative, again, because people are just happy to go to the internet for all information now, which is input by someone who, guess what? It's logarithms, right? You flood that in there and say, this is what it is. This is the established age. Well, take a look at this. What's the average lifespan of a human?
I don't know. I think it depends on where you're at too, right?
It does.
America, it's probably 86, but you go to like Somalia and it's probably like 55.
Right. Depends on your living conditions, some genetics. I mean, in the U.S., I think we're around 78, I think is the average age. And I think that's combined male and female. The female drives that age up a little bit more.
Yeah.
But how is it? I think
stupid,
Japan is.
Killed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's about cleaning the gene pool out because we do dumb, risky stuff. But Japan, I think the Japanese, like in Okinawans, are, up there way high, like in the high 80s, 90s. And there's what happens to these people that live to be 100 and 105 years old. And there's a good share of people that follow that demographic. Does that mean that is your lifespan now is 100 and 105 because somebody made it to that? No, that's not realistic. The part what they're trying to do by increasing that lifespan is then that makes a later delay in when a animal can be butchered. Okay, you do that, guess what? You've just put people out of business because you cannot sustain and hold animals that long and feed them because you have more into feeding them than what you can have as profitability. So they're working that angle as well, that you can't take care of the animal through veterinary practices. You can't do selective breeding, and now you can't butcher for food source at a point where it's profitable. So there's a multifaceted challenge or attack on the ability to be in agriculture. It's pointed. That's purposeful. I mean, these people aren't stupid. I mean, they are using now politics in order to force you to get what they want through people's ignorance. And I'm not saying people are stupid. I'm saying they're not listening or researching or using even some common sense and thinking about critical thinking skills of what's going on and why. And they just take somebody's word for it. It's like with an emotional base, and that's what these people, really prey on, is an emotional response. It's like, oh my God, yes, I'm going to vote for that because this is horrible, and have no idea. It's all about emotion. And if you'll notice, most of these radical ideas are about fear tactics, scaring the hell out of people, and emotion of like, I have to be against this because it's not right. It's just not right.
Yeah. The I think the big thing that you brought up too is, let's say 20 years. You know what? Let's go with a more realistic lifespan. Let's say for us, the natural lifespan is actually 14. So what would be the 25%? It'd be 3.5 years for us. 14 divided by 2 is 7. Divide that by 2 to make a quarter is going to be 3.5 years. Okay. Is that realistic for us? It would stretch, but you could do it. The
No, you can
problem
only do
though,
it for a short time
right. The
because you got to
problem
drain your
is,
resources. Yeah.
yeah, the problem is the herd in which you're using to produce those animals, you're gonna quadruple over that time. And what's gonna happen is you're gonna take that and that whole system. The animals you have now are using, they're maxing out the land, because we've talked about this before, the usage of land. The the animals are using all the availability of that land. Then they're taking more in the winter. Why are they taking more? Because we have to supplement them with hay, because they can't use what's on the ground already.
Yeah, they're not on their own.
No. And then now you've got 3 times what's already being used to produce the animals in storage. Essentially, they're sitting in pens, they're hanging out, they're just kind of sitting around being fat and lazy. They're not doing anything productive for us. We have just become a mini feedlot, and we have taken a loss for the last 3 years because we couldn't sell any of those animals. So now for 3 years, you've dug yourself into debt because you have absolutely no income from the beef aspect whatsoever. Now, suddenly, on the third and 3.5 years later, so we'll say 4, on the
Keep
fourth
going.
year.
I got to get power here. So keep going.
Okay. On the 4th year, now you're going to actually sell the animals. So this whole process ends up becoming a giant loop, which, again, is it possible? Yeah, it is. But what's going to happen is you're going to have, while you already have overhead in the beef and agriculture industry, you just created your own overhead again all over. And now we're having to sell these animals 4 years behind, and you're never going to make up all the loss that you had over those 4 years. So what does it force you to do? All right, you either have to liquidate all animals, or you have to liquidate the entire ranch. I mean, there's really no way around that other than
you're forced to liquidate during that time in order that your carrying capacity doesn't overexceed your ability to hold those animals.
right.
It's not, you don't wait 3 years and start to liquidate. You're to max capacity now. So if let's say we can't sell, we got a herd that's of 100 cows. Let's make this easy. And you're producing 100 calves. We can't sell those to anybody because
Right.
they're not going to take them. They're not going to hold them.
Right.
Because they're not going to take a loss. So you have to hold those 100 head. You've got a carrying capacity for your place of 100 head. What are you going to do?
Yeah, because you got double that now. You have 100 cows, 100 calves. You've got 200 animals on a 100 carrying capacity area.
Correct.
Yeah.
You can't afford to feed them all because you can't feed all of their needs year round. So you stop breeding, or you sell all of your older cows that now are eligible to be sold because they've lived, 25% of their natural life, which is bunk.
Yeah, because you can't sell the calves. You can't sell those 100 calves.
Right. So effectively, you have to stop and cease all operation. You're done. You cannot do it because you got nowhere to go. You might as well stick a bullet in them because you can't feed them, and that's the large part of this that people don't understand who are not in that business.
Yeah. Now realistically, that's what would happen.
Yep.
What I was explaining was if you tried to make it work regardless, but you still, again, you've just created overhead for a second time. You've gone under because you are so far in the red. There's no way you're coming back out. You've dug yourself into, the Berkeley pit of
you have not dug a damn thing. You have been forced.
Well, yeah, that's true too. You've been told to go down into a tunnel. But
and the argument is nobody's forcing you to being a
Yeah.
cattle operation. You've got freedom of choice.
I
Again,
had
the
some,
hypocrisy of what freedom of choice is.
yeah. I had somebody ask me that too. Carrying capacity. Because I mean, it came back to the same thing that we've talked about before. If you're not making money, because we're not, if we're not making money at this, why do you keep doing it? I'm like, that's a hard one to answer because every answer that I give to you, you're not gonna accept as valid, which is it's who we are, it's what we do, it's our heritage. I can tell you that every day, and you're gonna say, yeah, well, my family was immigrants and they conformed, they adapted, and they moved on so that they could survive and they could make money and still be comfortable. I'm like, yeah. Would you rather make money or would you rather be happy? And they're like, well, you can do both. I'm like, yeah, but not in this industry.
Yeah. Yeah. We've had 2 good years, 1975 and next year.
Yeah. I think it just kind of comes back to that. So the other thing too is, do you think the Pause Act will be successful? Do you think it'll
I,
pass
yeah.
in some
Yeah.
way, shape, or form, or as it is in its entirety? And if so, when do you think that'll happen? Do you think it'll be like this year, next year, or 10 years from now, or 20 years from now?
I think locally, I think that Pause Act will probably pass in Colorado
Yeah.
because you've got the Denver area. You've got a lot of like here, you've got a very large population that is not agriculturally based. And those that are
Yeah.
in agriculture are a very small, very, very small minority. And you got these wackos in politics in high places put in by the governor's boyfriend, or I don't know what their status is, but um, they are a couple, has appointed this person to a spot where they're using their politics to forward this cause. I think it'll pass in Colorado just because the misinformation and the ignorance of people who follow blindly without asking critical questions. And you know what? Sometimes it's not their fault because they don't even know what questions to ask. If you're that unfamiliar with something, you don't know what questions are pertinent. You don't know anything about it, so you rely on them telling you what is factual, but the facts are not always facts. The facts are their opinions or their agenda. That is
Mm-hmm.
another buzzword that's used all the time for what they want to have happen. So, and they'll say the same thing about us, that we're just lying to you, that we're horrible to these animals when they're, you know, not there because they don't even know, but they're just going to assert that because it helps their argument. It's not about um, putting forth an argument that's valid because if you did that, it's easier to attack someone else and say how evil and bad they are and they need to be stopped.
It's also really easy to just say farmers and ranchers are uneducated. They're just
Oh
high
yeah,
school, high school graduates, and that's it. But
right.
we've discussed that before too.
Right, and that's done all the time too. But so I think that will probably pass in Colorado.
When
Wouldn't
do you
surprise
think
me
it'll be?
at all.
This year, couple years,
I
decade?
don't I don't know exactly when it's slated for their whenever they do their legislative actions.
I,
I mean, sure, they vote every year, but I'm not
I
sure when that would go on. But
yeah, I
it'll
saw something in
probably
the article that said they're trying to do a petition for the end of this year. So that makes me think that their state legislature probably convenes late fall, winter timeframe, probably.
be spring. Who knows? My beginning of the year is like when ours is, and I think
Yeah.
that's when most of them do that. But they were looking with that Pause Act to get it on the ballot. They were getting, of course, petitions signed, and they were meeting that. Well, it's easy to do that when you have people and running around at
Denver.
the malls or high traffic areas for ball games, whatever, for people coming in, and they're like, oh yeah, how many times have you seen somebody blindly listen to somebody, don't even research it, but sign a petition, and they just sign it blindly? It's like, no,
They do that at
I've
a lot
asked
of
people.
colleges.
Sure they do. Why not? Because guess what they're doing? They're going on that emotional argument. Again, I've never heard one yet that didn't go on either an emotional issue or a this is going to save the taxpayers or this is going to create tax income.
Well,
So it's about that, which is still in a way, it's not just economic, but that's an emotional thing too. It's like, man, if it'll save on my taxes, whew, that'll be a good thing,
another
right?
thing too is what I dislike about when they go to campuses and they do that is you may have people signing a petition on campus that are from out of state. You're
Absolutely.
you're gonna let somebody from out of state sign a petition
Doesn't
about
matter.
my
You just need
state?
a name. Just need a name on that thing.
That's not right. I think I'm 100% support the First Amendment. Petition is part of the First Amendment. For those of you that don't know, because many people forget petition is part of that. 100% supportive of it. But when it doesn't pertain to you and you're not from the area, I think you should not be allowed to sign that petition.
Well, and the other part of that is when those petitions are turned over, they have to verify, or supposed to verify that some of these people are legitimate only. And,
Yeah,
there's a lot of fraud that goes
that
on,
doesn't happen.
unfortunately, with that too, that they're, writing people's names in. But I've been asked, I can't imagine that there isn't anybody who hasn't been in town at some point that hasn't been asked to sign a petition. And you say, what's this about? And you start asking them pointed questions and then they can't answer. They get mad.
Just sign the
They'll get,
petition, man. Like,
yeah,
be a part of the
this is
movement.
good. Just, yeah, exactly. And it's like, no. And then you go, I'll take a look at it. And you go, no. And you start asking some critical thinking skill type questions to them that they can't answer. They're just out there being tools.
Yeah.
They're just grabbing signatures for a larger group or good, the common good. So
Yeah.
don't trust what's going on that way and why. But this is an absolute again forcing people through a legislative action. They're using politics again as a dagger to hold at the throat of somebody or destroy an industry. They're doing it with the oil industry. And you know what? I think we need to look, on those things, alternatives. Absolutely. Why wouldn't we? It's stupid not to. I've had an idea for years how that we could solve our energy crisis or any energy crisis, but we haven't got the technology to do it. And I think it would legitimately take care of our problems, but we just aren't there yet. So in the meantime, why do you want to shoot yourself in the foot? Why? And these people aren't shooting themselves in the foot; they're shooting somebody else in the head, and that's what is the big problem. Is and I think that it'll come around where they don't even fully realize the impact if you put all meat production out of business and you no longer have them. What are you gonna do with those animals then?
Right.
What's going to happen with them? Are you going to be responsible for putting them all down because you can't hold them? Where are they going to go? Our national parks, which are already stressed in many
You want to talk
cases,
about
but they
carrying capacity? Let's look at a natural carrying capacity.
right. Well, but
Yeah.
now if you stick a bullet in an animal's head because you can't feed it, are you being cruel and unusual in
Yeah.
your punishment of that animal? Are you committing murder? I mean, they will stop at nothing to legitimize what they're doing without having the full thought process from start to end of where this is going to go.
So my question is, I'll say Colorado passes the Pause Act. Let's say in the next 5 years. Let's assume maximum, 2026. It's in effect. You start to see the decline of the meat production sector of Colorado's ag industry. What do you think the impact, similar to how we've seen Seattle essentially Seattle and Denver, but Washington and Colorado were the first two states to say yes to recreational marijuana. That was back in 2012, I think. Similarly, it's kind of over the past 10 years become more states are doing the same thing, right? So looking at that for the ag industry in 2026, Colorado has the Pause Act 100% in effect. What do you think the impact is going to be on the rest of the U.S.? What's the perspectives going to be? Or do you think everybody's going to sit back and watch and see what happens? Or Do you think everybody, the federal government's going to try and roll out something similar and say it's good for the entire nation, or do you think there's going to be a giant, almost like the Tea Party, in that there's going to be a massive shift to the opposite spectrum because of what happens?
I think, for like Colorado, if that passes, it's too late already for them. Their legislature isn't going to do anything. I'm not so sure that their legislature, when you go through a ballot initiative, you're bypassing the legislature anyway, which is not necessarily a bad deal, because you want, again, a petition. You want to be able to petition your government, and that's one way you do that. If your legislature won't act and you have a legitimate grassroots, based on fact, that will say, okay, this is what we want to do, legislature, we're passing this law, you need to make sure this gets enacted. I mean, that's how it works. I mean, they
Right.
did the same thing in Montana here with they legalized marijuana on the last ballot initiative. However, the legislature is the one who has to then say, okay, we're listening, so we have to make this be able to be implemented. With respect to this, it's the same thing. The impact that is going to make is going to be felt almost immediately, because why couldn't it be? I mean, we're talking about the same issues where you can't carry these animals. I think you're going to have a large exodus
Yep.
of animals that are going to be shipped out, and
I
they're
would
going to
say
be either sold. Yep.
export's going to go through the
To other
roof over the
states.
course of like 2 years to
Yeah,
probably Wyoming, Montana, Nebraska, Texas,
right,
Utah,
they're
Nevada.
going to take those up, and it's going to be very similar, I think, to the Second Amendment pushes that are going on, where states that are saying, no, we're not doing this, they will start to do this at their own legislative, and they won't even take petition,
Like an
because they'll act fast.
act.
Yes. Yep. And
Yeah.
they'll say, we will not. And just like our governor here in the state of Montana just said, we are not. And these are, laws that he asked for and are now, he's signing them into law because the legislature picked them up. Said any anti-gun, any gun bans, any bans on anything that are done at the federal level will not be recognized by the state. 10th Amendment type argument.
Yeah.
So I see that happening. And then, what's happening to a lot of these larger states for other reasons similar to it, New Jersey, New York, California, people are leaving those states by, the thousands and thousands of people that are dispersing. So I think the same thing is going to happen here. It's going to hurt the state. People won't be able to do business there. And agriculture is not a standalone business. There are a lot of businesses supported by agriculture that
Like
are
restaurant industry.
absolutely, yeah. How many stores? How many feed stores or gasoline, diesel? I mean, those are service type stores that agriculture is what they cater to, and people don't realize that.
So
There's a lot of manufacturing type stuff that goes into support for agriculture.
so that's something that I just thought of. Let's say I'm playing hypothetical here, and it's a hypothetical day because of the based off this
Sure.
concept, but uh pause act pass, mass exodus, like I said, all the cattle, pork, whatever, all of it's all out. Colorado, out of Colorado. That doesn't mean restaurants are going to be gone. So when it comes to things like, hey, a prime rib or a ribeye or a sirloin or a burger or something like that, do you think they're still going to be allowed, those restaurants in Colorado will be allowed to import those meat products, or will it have to be all grain protein based products?
I think that's going to depend on the store. I mean, how long do you think you could go without having a piece of meat on a plate
It doesn't
before you were
matter.
like,
It's
oh
what the
man, I
state
need
law
it?
is. You know what I mean? I'm like, that's what I'm thinking is like, is the state
Right.
law going to require them not to provide meat
Don't
actual to a restaurant in the state?
know. That would be next.
Yeah.
That's the next step, right?
Well, I mean, it's already been, if anybody's seen anything on social media over the past couple of weeks, I mean, that's what the Biden administration said, was they want people to eat no more than, what was it, some ridiculous amount, no more than 4 pounds of beef a year at a maximum of like 12 burgers total or something like that. And it'd be like a burger a month. Like, it was something just super ridiculous. I'm like, are you kidding me?
But who's wanting to do that?
It's probably those same organizations that are trying to do the Pause Act and stuff like that. They're going through the executive branch actual in the White House to do it.
And that's where I was leading to. You got these, what they are is your climate change radicals that are saying, oh, cows are evil. They're causing global warming. It's them alone. We got to get rid of them. So we'll have to reduce the number that we still can't tell people they can't have meat. You can have meat. You can have all the meat you want as long as it's 4 pounds a year.
Yeah. I think it's funny that they did that only like 2-3 weeks after Meat Out Day, and Meat Out Day ended up being, I saw all over the place. People were cooking barbecues and stuff because of it. It's just
good for them.
And we had an episode based off of that. And that, I mean, I think it's proof that this is contextual of a lot of things, specifically COVID over the last year. The government's been telling and mandating a lot of people to do a lot of things, and simple things like food. People are starting to get really upset about, and they're saying, no, I'm going to do the absolute opposite of what you're telling me.
It's a different generation. I think, I can't think, because we are so selfish as a culture now, that if you ask people to ration or watch what their purchases are, or tell them, like during World War II, hey, this is all you get. Here's your rationing. We need this for the war effort. I think today people would throw an absolute fit and say, we are not doing this because this is my right to have this. Where our grandparents, or my grandparents, I mean, and great grandparents, they rationed. I mean, literally rationed, and it was rare for them to get a lot of anything. They got only what they were allowed to have. Now, isn't that funny that the people who would want to ration you, those are the first ones that will say, no, I need to have what I want. You can't ration me.
I mean, toilet paper at the beginning of COVID.
There you go. That was a ridiculous one. It was all self.
There's people that still probably have 3 or 4 packages of 48 rolls.
Well, or those that had bought cases of it after this was all over, then wanting to return them to Costco.
Yeah,
that was going on too. It's like, hell with you, So, it all depends on whose cow or which member of the herd is being consumed by the wolf. If it's somebody else, it's not really bothering me. I see him out there and I see it happening to him, but it sucks to be you, but it ain't happening to me. So therefore I'm okay. I think there's a lot of that until, the herd starts getting whittled down more and more to where, like, these wolves are getting closer. And unfortunately, we tend to be more reactive than proactive about things. So I see Colorado, not good things happening there. I haven't seen good things happening in Colorado for years. I mean, they really have changed. Their cultural outlook has gone from a strong agricultural type based state to now. I mean, it is anti-agriculture. So, and you've got guys that are just trying to grind out a living, produce some food for people, not just in their state, but a lot of our food goes out of state. Most of it goes to feedlots and gets dispersed, and probably gets some of it, it gets boxed beef and goes out of the country on exports. I don't know. I'm not following each one of them, but that it's not a real warm, fuzzy, hey, we grow it here and we just supply food to everybody that we know. That's not realistic. I mean, that happens where, you'll be able to do that for certain individuals who want to buy your product, but as a larger group, no. And so you can't control that. It's going to be very, very interesting. But you know what? when people who are in power get that power and they make changes, guess what they want to do? Make more changes. And that's why I see that stepping up, just as you say, and to, okay, now we're going to limit how much. We don't have all this food, don't need it, because we've been able to make the Pause Act happen, and we've made these cows happy. They can live long lives. No, they haven't. You know, their narrative is going to be completely different. And so the food supply is less. We've learned to live without this. We are making great strides for climate change. And that's, I mean, these are all narratives that it's arguments why you should do something, when really all it is their personal views on something, not anything that has to do with any kind of fact or real. Because, you know, climate change is climate change. Yeah, it happens. It was happening long before the Industrial Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, you've got arguments on both sides. You know, they had to take the signs down in Glacier National Park that said these glaciers are going to be gone by the year 2020. Well, guess what? 2020 come and went, and the glaciers are still there. Yeah. So they'd take the signs down. So scare tactics. It's going on people's emotions. So it isn't good, because guess what? They're coming for you.
I think I would encourage anybody watching this that's seen the video or the conversation to its entirety, look up the Pause Act, find out how accurate our stuff is. We try to find legitimate sources and not just nonsense. That's also why I try to also pull from multiple sources, because if everything is pointing in a similar direction, there's probably some validity to it. But look up the Pause Act, PAUSE, just like the pause button. It's the practices where we try to take care of animals, we try to help with calving and stuff like that, would make us criminals. It would make other cattlemen and ranchers criminals, and that's not the case. We're literally trying to preserve life and take care of animals. And
if I got a cow that's calving and she's having trouble calving, and we got a leg back on a calf, and I have to reach in and push that cow or that calf back, grab its leg and pull it out so I can keep the cow from dying and save the calf, that's a criminal act under the Pause Act.
Yes, because then it's been considered a sexual act, because you've reached inside of her body to do that. Further, it wouldn't criminalize us, but it would destroy the industry because of the forcing of sale of cattle and other animals after 25% of their life has been determined or been lived, which again, we've discussed that 25% isn't realistic in the terms that we were looking. And it's ridiculous.
But if you don't do that, you are a criminal.
Yes. If you don't conform to that, then yes, you are a criminal. Other than that, any parting comments, Dad?
Oh, harder and harder.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's just, don't believe I was told as a kid, don't believe anything you hear and only half of what you see. Well, hell, you can't even believe anything you see anymore. So you got to think critically, ask lots of questions, ask questions of people you don't agree with, because that will give you really a good indication of, is this BS or not? You know, I mean, what are your arguments? If somebody's got good arguments to something and they're legitimate, hey, I might learn something, or I can change the way I'm doing something to make it better or more efficient. Mm-hmm. That's all about the learning and knowing and improving. But when somebody's trying to get you to do something from an emotional basis, beware. Don't just jump on it. Go get facts, talk to people, ask. And there isn't hardly anybody in agriculture that I can think of that wouldn't answer a question and think things out and say, hey, this is what would happen to us. Ask people what would happen to them. Ask, what would this do to you? What if? And just keep asking questions and keep digging down. If this happens, then what? What would cause this? And then what would that cause? You know, that's how you learn. And I think we do less and less of that all the time because we're busy, for one. We like to feel like we're contributing. We want to feel good that, hey, I'm making a difference. Well, are you? You know, you might be just being used. So with that, I guess we'll put this to rest for right now, and we will thank you till you're better paid.